What's up guys, welcome to Wasted Space, and today we are looking at the recently released alpha for the DayZ Standalone. Of course, it's alpha, we waited ages for it, and it's come out with a big warning saying, hey, it's going to be a year until beta. So let's keep that in mind as we look at it. And I'm going to go straight into this one with a kind of half comparison with the DayZ mod, and a kind of half first look guide sort of approach. So, for those people who didn't play the mod, haven't seen this before, what is DayZ? Well, best description I can come up with, despite its name, is an apocalypse survival simulator. Keep that zombie thing in mind, but do not think that it is a core aspect of the game. They are there, you need to consider them, but the main deal here is it is a survival simulator, with all that that brings. Now, what I'm hinting at there is that your main interactions in this game are going to be with other players. But before we get too far down that route, let's dive straight in with the basics. How do you survive in DayZ? In a nutshell, the storyline is that you have tried to escape this apocalypse by boat, and it's all gone horribly wrong, and you have crashed on the shores of Chernerus. You start with nothing but what you're wearing, so your first priority is always going to be to find something to eat and drink. These are constant concerns, and unlike in the mod, they're far more severe and have a exponential effect the longer you leave them and the longer you ignore them. These are shown through the UI interface, which I'll just briefly go through here. Most of it is a lot more straightforward than the original mod version of the UI, although, as I understand it, the UI is still being developed in the mod, so perhaps they're now a lot more similar than they used to be. End result is you can drag and drop items around. The important part of the UI is down the bottom where it says hands. A lot of items can only be used when they sit in that slot, and so it's worth taking into account to drag them in there in order to, say, eat something, drink something, reload a weapon, anything like that needs to be in your hands. The inventory system as a whole, though, is very straightforward, and as long as you keep in mind that this is much more of a simulator than other games, things will make sense and be quite intuitive. Initially, your best bet in hunting gear and food is to head down the coast. You'll often spawn with a town or a city in sight, and given that you start with nothing, the first thing you should really be doing is heading straight in there and searching the buildings for whatever loot's left. Right now, both the loot spawning and the zombie spawning aren't functioning correctly in the standalone, so there's a lot less of it about than there should be. This means that often the first town you encounter won't actually have any loot in it, but this is only going to be a temporary thing, as I've said, so assume that heading to the nearest town is going to always reward you with something, at least. The first thing you should really be looking out for when searching these towns is food. This is a little bit more complex than it sounds, however, because a lot of the food you will find is either rotten, and trust me, do not eat the rotten food, or it's in cans, and getting at something in a can requires a sharp tool. There's only one food item currently that doesn't require either of those, and that is, there is a can of sardines which has a ring pull on it that you can open by hand. But it means that your first priority is also to find some method of opening the food that you're finding. It is possible to find non-rotten fruit, but I really don't rely on this, so keep in mind first priority, something sharp to open the food up with. Also try and keep an eye out for water bottles or water canteens. You do find a lot of soda, and this will actually restore a little bit of both food and drink, but relying on those is a really bad way of going about it. So the best bet is to find yourself a water bottle or a canteen which you can then refill at wells. As you're looking around for all this, you're also likely to come across both some more clothes and also potentially a weapon. Now, dealing with the clothes side of things first, as I mentioned in the inventory bit, clothes are basically a method of storing items, and you'll find different clothes with different numbers of slots in them that you can switch around and to some extent put on top of what you begin with. At the moment, all the clothes really do is give you more equipment slots and obviously affect how camouflaged your appearance is. It's worth keeping that in mind so that you pick stuff up that's more sort of green and brown than purple and yellow. But with the armour engine, there is some potential in future to add in a mechanic to do with the temperature of your character as well. This was done in a couple of the maps in the DayZ mod, and you can see that the armour engine is capable of replicating it quite well. On cold nights you'll be able to see the breath of your character, for example, so hopefully this is something that will come in the future, and clothes will be more about that side of things too. Aside from that, there's only two items of clothing that really seem to have any real effect. You can get helmets and motorcycle helmets which will protect you from head impacts, and then maybe, and we haven't found any information solid about this, you can get respirators and gas masks, and that could potentially help you with infection. The weapons side of things can be split up into two halves. Basically there are melee weapons and guns. To begin with, you're most likely to be finding weapons of the melee variety, and in DayZ Standalone, unlike the mod, there's quite a large range of different weapons you can find, everything from fire extinguishers through to fireman axes. However, some of them are much more effective than others. So, for example, the fire extinguisher, don't expect to be doing a huge amount of that. The same is also true for the wrench. But you still want to be picking these up, taking them with you, because they're your best defense against zombies, which are a big problem when you don't have a melee weapon and a lot less when you do. Moving on to the gun side of things, this is where a lot of changes have happened from the original mod. Guns now have separate components, and each component of the gun needs to be kept in good condition. All the items in the game now have a condition on them which goes in order from pristine to worn to damaged to badly damaged to ruined. And depending on what item it is you're talking about, they may need to be in pristine condition to be functional. So a scope is a prime example. If that's not pristine, the chances are the glass on it is smashed, and therefore it's utterly useless to you. In general, the best way to go about this is to pick up a sort of stock weapon as soon as you get it available, and then slowly start replacing the bits on it until you've got something functional and that you can shoot. The biggest barrier to this is finding a mag that is in good enough condition to load, and then finding the ammo to put into it. So we've frequently found weapons relatively easily, and then spent ages trying to find the magazine that you need in pristine condition in order to put the rounds in it. The final thing you can find when searching around your first town is some form of meds. Now these can spawn in first aid kits or as individual items around the world, and I'm not going to cover them too closely because there's a lot of work left to be done to that system to make everything function right. There's a lot of items that don't currently do anything. I've put a link down below to another DayZ DB page which provides a list of all the debuffs and how you know you've got the various effects that are in the game, stuff like chemical poisoning, food poisoning, that sort of thing. The general rule of thumb when dealing with this stuff is keep your food and your drink as high as possible, and that means beyond the point where your thirsty and hungry indicators disappear. You will get messages like your stomach is full. That is a good indicator that you are actually filled up on food and drink. The other element that plays into this that hasn't been very well documented is that your blood has a direct relation to the amount of food, energy and drink you consume. So keeping your blood levels nice and high is going to make the rest of it a lot easier, and when your blood levels get low, you'll find yourself consuming a huge amount of the other resources. So having searched your first town, hopefully found some food and drink, hopefully found yourself a weapon and some more clothing, it's then the case of navigation, and this is one of the biggest elements and difficulties in DayZ overall, is finding your way around. In the original mod, you could find a map, and the map would show you, literally like a real life map, the map of the world, but you would have to navigate and track where you were on it. And then you could, on some servers, set a marker point on the map and use this for a whole number of things, but generally just to work out where you were. All of this is gone in the standalone. Maps are there, but you find them in parts, which means more often than not you don't have the part you need for where you are, and it's very unusual to get a whole map together so you can actually find your way around. So navigation is mostly done using DayZ DB. Now I've put a link to this site below. It's really handy and was for the original mod as well, but basically just has an online map that they're slowly updating to show where loot spawns, where roads are, and you can use this combined with a bit of navigation skills in game to work out where exactly you are and then try and keep track of where you want to go as you move your way around. This is going to be very important to being successful in DayZ, because keeping track of where exactly you are and where you're going is what firstly dictates you don't spend an enormous amount of time running around pointlessly in the woods lost as anything, because trust me, on a map as big as Chernobyl is, that is very easily done if you're not paying attention. But also because there are some areas of the map that are much better for loot, but also much worse for encountering other players. Your player contact in DayZ is going to be flipping a coin. A lot of players at the moment are friendly, and partly I think this is because it's quite difficult to get a functional gun, as I mentioned earlier. But it does mean that you shouldn't take an assumption that everyone is going to kill you on sight. You should at least attempt, I believe, to be friendly towards people initially. But also, the other side of that coin is there are plenty of people out there that will kill you for your can of beans, just like they always would in the mod. For me, the fun part of DayZ is trying to find a sort of balance point between those two attitudes, where you're wary, you're willing to be friendly to the right people, but you're also very careful around the wrong people. However you choose to go about it, just keep in mind that much like in the mod, the airfields are very dangerous areas, as is Chernogorsk on the southern coast, but also they've added a couple of new military spawns and a couple of new very high yield residential spawns to the game, mostly up in the north of the map, and these are attracting a lot of players as well. The map in general versus the mod has been tweaked quite a lot in quite subtle ways in some areas. Obviously, the standout one is that all along the top of the north of the map there is the beginnings of a new town road network, and they've extended the railway line to go the entire way around through this. So I'm very excited to see what they introduce there, because before it was no man's land, hills, and potentially a place for players to try and build bases. As I'm not really trying to do a guide video, more introduce the basics of the game and how it's changed to the mod, I'm not really going to talk any further about what you should be doing or where you should be going on the map. Hopefully I've given you enough to survive if you're a new player, or given you a bit of an insight if you're an existing player who's played the mod before. Last thing I really want to touch on is how things are going to go in future with DayZ. Now obviously there's a lot of stuff already out there about what's planned, the obvious ones being vehicles, fixing the zombies and how the loot spawns, and that there was going to be some sort of rudimentary crafting system put into the game on top of what was there in the mod. Beyond that, there's a lot of potential in the game and a lot of little hints towards mechanics that aren't there yet but could well be introduced somewhere down the line. I'm glad they stuck with the Arma 3 engine. I think in future this has a lot of potential, and it's also, despite its critics, right for DayZ. The clunkiness and the general way that Arma tries to simulate real life fits DayZ very, very well, and I don't think it would work with any other engine in quite the same way. So in summary, despite quite a long wait for the DayZ Standalone, I think what we've now been presented with shows a lot of potential for where it's going to go in future, and although it's taken quite a long time to get to this point, I think we're definitely looking at a thing that's going to be a game in its own right, rather than just a continuation of the mod. Personally, I really enjoyed the mod, and I'm expecting to enjoy the standalone even more. It's unique amongst its competition in that, despite there being a lot of other games out there that try to do exactly the same thing, DayZ's approach remains different to everybody else's and pulls it off in a way that the rest of them manage to feel arcadey in comparison. Overall though, DayZ is a story generator. I'd say go and pick it up and try it out, especially with some friends, because I guarantee you at the end of that, you will have had some scenarios and experiences that you will be talking about for a long time to come, and there aren't many other games out there that can do that sort of thing. I hope people will find what I've said helpful, maybe a little bit of a first look at what's changed in the mod, maybe it's the first time looking at DayZ and this will give you a glimpse at what the game is like. Trust me, there's a whole load more that I just didn't want to cover in such a short video so early on in alpha, and I can't wait to see where things go. So thanks a lot for watching guys, consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you found this helpful, and I will catch you next time.